What signs would you even warn women, let's say, if you see this, run?
333 million Americans, approximately 300 million of which are adults. Psychopathy, which isn't a clinical term anymore, the clinical term for both psychopaths and sociopaths is antisocial personality disorder. But when those were more acceptable terms, it was estimated that 1% of the American population fall under psychopathy. 3% of the American population fall under sociopathy or sociopathy, right? So right there's 4% of the American public.
That's a lot.
Add into that narcissistic personality disorder. That's 6% of the American public. That means 10% of the American adult population, empirically, are either psychopaths, sociopaths, or narcissists.
And just to quickly do the math, that's...
Say it.
Is it 30
million?
30 million?
30 million
I was like,
adults.
in my head I paused because I was like, I can't be doing the math right.
You're doing the math right. That is the reaction that anybody should be having right now. 30 million people fall into one of those three categories. So when you meet somebody who acts like that, yes, they are an extreme, but you shouldn't be surprised because 1 out of every 10 is going to be one of those people. You're going to meet 10 people today. There are more than 10 people in your office, right? Empirically, 1 out of every 10 people is one of those three categories.
All right, how do I test this? I'm going to walk up to every single person in my company now and ask them questions.
I'm sure your hiring standard filtered all of that out.
Let's hope.
But yes, so it's an extreme, but it's out there. So because it's so prevalent, it makes your first question so much more viable. How do you know when you're coming across a person like that? So the first big thing to understand is the telltale sign for somebody who is antisocial personality disorder, your psychopaths and your sociopaths. The biggest thing is that they lack empathy. Empathy is the thing that makes us so that we can relate to somebody else's feelings. Different than sympathy. Sympathy means that you hurt and I'm sorry that you hurt and I'm here to give you my sympathy, but I don't feel your pain, right? Empathy means you're hurt and I can put myself in your shoes and I can feel some of your pain, right? When you are with a partner or when you have a love interest or you're dating somebody or it's your child or it's your parents, when they don't feel empathy, they can't relate to your feelings, that is a big telltale sign that you might be dealing with somebody who's on the spectrum of antisocial personality disorder. Another major indicator is that they don't believe in the rules of conduct or the rights of others. They don't believe that people are equal, right? So they have certain rights and you have lesser rights. So they have a right to privacy, but you don't. They have a right to knowing how much money is in the bank account, but you don't, right? So they have this discrepancy in how they believe what they're entitled to versus what you're entitled to.
How would you test somebody subtly to see if they're like that or not?
I like the way you're thinking, because that's exactly how you find out whether or not the person you're suspicious of deserves that suspicion or whether you're just being paranoid. You have to test them. So one of the best ways to test somebody for empathy is to make an unpredictable or unpredicted change. Just change something, right? If you all agreed that you're going to go to dinner on Tuesday night, cancel dinner on Tuesday night and recommend let's go Wednesday instead. If they roll with that change easily, and if you test them more than one time, because one test by itself isn't really a test, right? It's a test over days, weeks, months. If you can make changes and they can accept those changes gracefully, then there's a very good chance that you're dealing with a normal, rational human being. If you start making changes and then they start guilting you or accusing you, or if they start getting angry, if they have volatile emotions that are in line with the changes that you're proposing, it shows that they already think that their time is more valuable than your time. Which now is an indicator that you're either dealing with somebody who is immature or you're dealing with somebody who is on that spectrum of personality disorder, whether it's narcissism or whether it's antisocial behavior. But if they can't handle change, it's a good sign that you're not dealing with somebody who sees you as an equal.
So with Dirty John, we would have seen, if they had asked him certain questions, they would have seen him potentially getting angry or having an visceral emotional response to something that is maybe not as extreme.
Correct, because change happens all the time, right? And in a situation where people are equal, like a healthy relationship, this is something that people don't often realize. A healthy relationship is transactional. I have something that benefits you, you have something that benefits me, so we share our benefits together. And in an ideal relationship, us sharing our benefits results in a net win for both of us. So the sum is greater than the total of the two parts, right? So a healthy relationship should be transactional, give and take. Sometimes I need your help, sometimes you need my help. In an unhealthy relationship, it's very one way. It's a zero-sum game. One person wins, one person loses. So you have to test whether your partner is willing to give and take, or whether they're just there to take. Going, again, back to the empirical evidence of the predominance of ISFJ women, and I know that there's lots of different types of codes, and there are women of all types of Myers-Briggs personality types, but the empirical evidence is 1 in 5 women is ISFJ. That ISFJ, she feels like she should trust this person, even though what she's seeing and what she's hearing tells her she shouldn't trust that person. She feels like she should, she sees that she shouldn't, but then she falls on her J, which tells her that as a woman in Western society, it's the right thing to do to give the benefit of the doubt. It's the right thing to do to give somebody a second chance. It's the right thing to do to let them prove themselves. And it's a tricky and difficult place to be. The more you test, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more information you have to challenge your instincts, which make you feel like you have to trust somebody that you shouldn't trust.
And is there sometimes like a piece of information that we hold on to as quote unquote evidence that we keep going back to, but maybe that's false evidence as well? And the reason why I ask you is Dirty John, apparently everyone said, oh, he was always saying that, like, what a great father he was. And like, you know, he was so loving to his 2 daughters. And so let's say you're meeting him for the first time, you hear about, oh my God, he's this great father. Maybe you meet the daughters, you think, oh my God, they've got a great relationship. Then you see signs on the contrary, but you keep going back to maybe false evidence that, no, but I must be imagining it because he's clearly an amazing father.
So what you're talking about now is something we call the relevancy principle. The relevancy principle dictates that whatever is the most relevant should carry the most empirical weight. So if you made a delicious steak 2 years ago, but every steak that you've made since then has just not been right, I shouldn't keep asking you to make steak, because over time, what you're showing is that you have lost relevancy in the art of making a good steak. It's the same thing with Dirty John. Could he have been a good father? Sure. Could he have been a good father 4 days ago? Sure. But what is he today? And what is he most often? What is the most relevant piece of information that you're getting? It's not necessarily that the evidence was false. He really did do nice things at some point. But he's also very realistically done dirty, suspicious, dishonest things since then. So you've got to fall back on the relevancy principle. This is another trap that women will fall into more often than men because of the societal pressure to give people the benefit of the doubt. The person, he just slapped you. He just called you stupid. He just spent money on the credit card and lied about it. Whatever he just did it. According to the relevancy principle, that has to carry more weight than what he did 6 months ago or 2 weeks ago or even yesterday. So if yesterday he said, I'm sorry, babe, I'm going to do better, and today he didn't do better, you have to put more weight in the action that he took today than the promise he made yesterday.
How do you reinforce that then? Because I love it. I think it's so strong. But you do end up in that moment, if you're not used to it or practice, just reverting back to the means.
Right. And you nailed it on the head right there. You have to practice. So there are certain tools that are very basic tools that we use in the field all the time to keep us away from the process of questioning and reverting, right? A journal is a fantastic tool, very simple tool to use. You keep a daily log or a morning log and an evening log. You keep some kind of journal to remind yourself of what is relevant in that moment. So then when something happens on a Tuesday, you can open your journal and go back to last Tuesday and see the journal entries and start to see what is the predominance of information. Without the journal, we forget. Our short-term memory only lasts for between 7 and 14 seconds.
Whoa!
It's super short-term. And in that short-term 7 to 14 seconds, our brain is deciding whether or not to move something from short-term memory into long-term memory. But long-term memory still only lasts about 72 hours. Then there's different categories, different types of long-term memory that your long-term memory will shift into to make permanent memories or make academic memories or make skilled behavior memories, right? So when it comes to behaviors of people, if we don't value it in the first 7 to 14 seconds, we won't even remember it. If we do value it because we think it's suspicious or we think it's dishonest, we'll hold on to it for maybe the next 48 hours. But after 48 hours, we let it go. If we don't do something else to make it permanent. So if you want to look back over the last 7 days of your relationship, a journal is a fantastic tool. A voice memo, a diary. These are all simple tools that we can use, right? I've even met field officers who just kept a jar. So 2 jars and marbles. And all they would do is they would put a marble into the good jar when they saw a good behavior and a marble into the bad jar when they saw a bad behavior. And over time, you just see like, oh, there's a predominance of bad behavior. And even though you don't know the specific examples, you get the gut feeling that you need to make the decision that you know is in your best interest.
And that visual, you just can't ignore it.
You can't ignore it. You can't rationalize your way out of that. But when you're sitting across from somebody who's a con and abuser or someone who actually is a narcissist or antisocial personality disorder, when you're sitting across from them, because they lack empathy, they know exactly how to make you feel good. Because making you feel good is just a matter of giving you what you want. So they say the things you like, they act the way you want them to act, because they logically, rationally, they understand what you cognitively are trying to achieve. They don't feel it, but they can see it like academically. There's the word that is most often used to describe a psychopath is someone who is cold-blooded. Cold-blooded is something that we often think of means like they'll murder you in cold blood.
Yeah.
What cold-blooded really means is that they don't get heated. They don't get passionate. They don't get excited. They don't get angry. They don't have that hot blood that makes you have a temper. Instead, they're always very detached. That's what cold-blooded means. From that cold-blooded position, they can literally read your patterns of behavior because they don't get distracted by all the emotions that you and I get distracted by that keep us from seeing a pattern.
Wow. Would it be harder to interrogate someone like that because they're not showing emotions and ebbs and flows?
It's harder to interrogate them on an emotional basis, yes, because they're very stable in their emotions. Compared to a sociopath, right? Psychopath and sociopath, both antisocial personality disorder. Sociopaths have very dynamic ranges of emotions. Narcissists have very dynamic ranges of emotions. So the good news for women is if you're dealing with a partner who can flip a switch on their emotions, you're not dealing with a psychopath. Even though a lot of times, like I know for men, when men see women go from extremely happy to extremely angry, we're like, oh my God, you're a psycho. It's actually exactly the opposite. The psycho is the person who never goes through those extremes. Somebody who goes through those extremes is the definition of the opposite of a psychopath. So when you're interrogating or when you're questioning somebody and you see that very stable, detached emotional foundation, you know that you're dealing with somebody who's on that spectrum of antisocial personality disorder. Remember, 10% of the American population falls under psychopath, sociopath, or narcissist. That 10% of people, the formula that makes them who they are is part genetic and part environmental. What kind of childhood do you have? What kind of parents do you have? What foundational emotions, what foundational survival instincts do your parents ingrain in you? In this case, the Tinder swindler was programmed with this sense of self-reliance, that you had to be nefarious, you had to be sneaky, you had to be a trickster, you had to lie. So his ethical compass was programmed completely different than the average person. Now, lying was needed to survive, right? And survival was, and success was defined by how effectively you lied and how much you stole. The average working class American family who's taught to believe in hard work and honesty and the pursuit of happiness, that is the total antithesis for them.
Which is why my mind doesn't go there when I meet people. The last thing I'm thinking of is like, oh, they're a complete quirk and they've got criminal record and they've done all this dodgy stuff. So how do you then start to know in those situations, because he's sending them photos, right, of like, oh, and he's like his face and like the bodyguard's like bleeding. And so You would think that that would be evidence. How do you start to identify when someone's actually withholding so many secrets? Because the fact that he was able to do all of that and have such a background that he never got found out is crazy to me. And if 10% really are all those things, how do you start to know if they're lying or not and then pull out any secrets that maybe they're trying to keep from you?
I would actually flip that on its axis.
Okay.
It's not your job to worry about other people. That's the F in the ISFJ. You feel like, and society has put a rubric on you where you feel like you are responsible for worrying about other people. That's why women end up oftentimes feeling like they have to please others. It's their responsibility to make others feel good. What I would recommend is that we completely change that mindset, right? The first thing that every human being, and especially for this conversation we're having, it would mean the world to me if every woman who hears this conversation, the first thing that she asks herself, the first statement that goes through her head every time she meets a new male is 1 in 10. 1 in 10. Is this person in front of me one out of the 10 that is going to be on this spectrum? First question, is this person one of the 10? That doesn't mean you don't talk to anybody. That doesn't mean you question them. It doesn't mean you assume they are, but you ask yourself the question. Right now, you're not asking yourself that question. Everybody comes with a blank slate. Everybody comes with an opportunity. Benefit of the doubt. We should change that rubric. This is not a benefit of the doubt type of world that we live in. We now live in a world where we should say, are you one of the 10? The second thing that women should pay attention to, how quickly do you like somebody? Because the faster you like them,
people really quickly, Andrew.
You need to slow yourself down because you already know what's going to happen if you like them too fast. They're going to get your trust and they don't deserve your trust yet. People who are not nefarious are oftentimes the hardest people to like. They're socially awkward. They're a little bit rude. They're kind of rough around the edges. So you don't fall in love with them very quickly, but they're probably very honest people. They're honest, which is exactly why they don't know how to manipulate the environment, manipulate your experience to make you like them and trust them so quickly. So when you're dealing with somebody that's a little bit like aggravating or irritating, chances are they're not trying to manipulate you. But if you're dealing with somebody who like, I really like that person. They always know what to say. They totally get me. Hold on. Time out. No like trust. Am I liking them too fast? Have I already started trusting them? And are they the 1 in 10? If you just ask yourself those two questions and you're constantly reminding yourself that those two things exist, you're going to slow the process down. We have a concept in espionage called time, distance, and change in direction. And that concept basically means that you need to create time, space, so that because time will tell you if something is real or not. You need to create distance. When you're always together, then the pattern is set and it's harder to see changes and deviations from the pattern than when you're physically apart, right? So it's like the reason we don't move in too fast with a boyfriend or move in too fast with a girlfriend is because once you're living on top of each other, it's very hard to see how the other person responds to the distance element. Instead of dating every day, we date every 3 or 5 or 12 days, right? Like give yourself distance and give yourself time to find the interruptions in the pattern. Give that manipulator space and time to screw up. Because someone who's genuine is going to be very consistent because they are genuinely demonstrating who they are. And then change in direction, like I was telling you about testing earlier, you want to make changes. Changes in direction will tell you a lot about how a person reacts to change. And if you're the one dictating the change, it tells you a lot about how they react to you being in control. A fair and equitable partner understands. Sometimes you're in control, sometimes I'm in control because it's a transactional relationship. A nefarious or malicious partner will never accept that you're the one making a change. They will always get upset about it and they will turn that against you.
So what about those scenarios? And because I love that breakdown, but the space thing almost, for me, I get why you're saying it, but there is something to someone who's trying to manipulate or lie or deceive you, use that space as a way to not have to keep interacting with you, giving you information that maybe then later they forget, right? Because, liars, you almost have to keep track of what they say to then say, let's say 6 months down the line, hang on a minute, that didn't jive with something else they said down here.
So when you're talking about someone with malicious intent, it's actually the other way around. People with malicious intent want to reduce that space. The reason they have space in the beginning, so think about Dirty John again. Dirty John was on a dating app. So he was cultivating multiple cons at one time. Well, the only way he can cultivate that many cons is by being distant from all of them.
Right.
But as he started to hone in on which ones were the most susceptible, his job was to close distance as quickly as possible. Think of it like a lion hunting a gazelle. A lion is going to sit and watch the herd and find the sick and the elderly of the herd. And then when the herd starts to run, that lion or lioness will pick the slowest one to attack and then dedicate all of their resources into closing the distance and attacking that one prey that is most susceptible to them. That's exactly what Dirty John was doing. That is what the Tinder swindler was known to do as well, was to cultivate multiple cons until the one showed itself as most susceptible, and then very quickly close distance and introduce that manipulative behavior. And there is a process to manipulation that's important to understand, and I'm sure we'll get to it. But when you start to see that manipulative behavior take hold, if you've done a good job of, is this person 1 of the 10? Am I liking them too fast? Have I used time, distance, and change in direction? And now, if you've done all of those things and you're like the Ted Bundy woman who was like, where are the door handles? Why is he a police officer in a Volkswagen? You've started collecting these data points of evidence that you should not trust the person. And that's the moment where she jumped out of a moving car. We all have to accept that sometimes to keep ourselves safe, that is what we must do. We must be willing to jump out of a rolling car. No matter what society thinks of us, our safety is our responsibility. Not the police, not mom and dad, not our husband, not our spouse. Our safety is our responsibility. And if that means that your parents are going to yell at you because you come back with torn jeans and a scuffed elbow, and they never believe that you saved your own life, to hell with them. You know you just saved your own life. Who cares what society thinks? There has to be a time when we're willing to challenge the societal norm and understand that the societal norm is not there for our best interests. It's there for the best interests of societal order. It's there for 90% of circumstances. It's not there for the 10% of bad guys who are out there looking for us.
When I think about Dirty John's, the daughter who ended up, stabbing him, to think through what, that my life is at stake at this point, so I will kill back, right?
Yep.
It had to take that for her to then make sure that he never does that again. Obviously, I'm not suggesting people just go out and kill people, but the fact that it was like her life or his, she ended up having to take his. But I think of how many of us don't feel the threat in that way, right? Where it's your life or death. But a lot of time it is from like a emotional standpoint. Like it's the death of your emotions, the death of your soul when someone can do something like that so extreme, and I think a big thing is you end up not only not trusting other people, you end up not trusting yourself.
Right, and that distrust of yourself is one of the key things that a manipulator is looking for. Because if you already don't trust yourself, what that means is you put your trust somewhere else. Because we all have to trust. We all need a North Star. We all need a guiding light, a compass. So when a manipulator sees someone who doesn't trust themselves, it's the perfect opportunity to step in and be the thing that they trust. Again, I was mentioning how I know that I'm privileged to be sitting on this show with you as a male on the show. And I know it's not just because you like my hair or you think I'm friendly.
Your hair is dope though, dude. And you are very friendly.
It's because CIA has a process for manipulating people. It's what CIA does. It's how it keeps America safe. CIA's job is to manipulate foreign targets into providing secrets to the United States that give the United States an unfair advantage in military, economics, and political power. Our job is to follow a very systematic manipulation process and identify the people who are susceptible to that specific manipulation process. It's what we're designed to do. And one of the prime things that we look for when we're cultivating a target, just like Dirty John, just like the Tinder swindler, when we're cultivating one out of many, many targets, what we're looking for is who is the person that demonstrates an inherent distrust for themselves. And then as we get to know and find those people, we then start to look for what the source is of their distrust of themselves. And when we find that the source of their distrust stems back to their childhood.
Is that typically where it comes from?
It comes from different places. So there are some people who distrust themselves because they made poor decisions in college, or they made bad decisions with money when they were, in their 20s or 30s. So there's all sorts of different places where people start to doubt themselves. But when you find someone whose self-doubt stems back to their childhood, now what you know is you have somebody who is deeply conditioned to be dependent on someone else. So George Santos was a politician, a corrupt politician who lied about his accolade, lied about everything, and still made it to Congress.
That's what's crazy.
When you look at his background, he came from a very poor Brazilian family where he was one of several children, where mom and dad were highly successful, and the children were kind of left to fend for themselves with a rotating door of nannies and whatever else, right? So in this Brazilian corrupt family, this is where he kind of built his foundation. This is where his wiring was made. So is anybody surprised that as he became a 40-year-old male in the United States in a predominantly paternal society, that he felt absolute comfort lying about his educational background, about his work history, about everything else to win a vote? And then is it not the ultimate con to basically con a constituency into voting for you? I mean, that is exactly how manipulation works. You manipulate the emotions of people who are susceptible to that manipulation. So he knew what the right message was with the right congressional district to get voted by saying the right things, just like spies collect assets by knowing what to say and how to change the vein of trust so that the target trusts the spy or trusts the con man, or a constituency trusts their congressional representative, or somebody trusts their doctor, or somebody trusts the CEO of a company.
If you want to learn how to spot a manipulator, a con man, or a psychopath, then click here right now.
When you put the four of those things together, you kind of create the perfect concoction for a con man to step in, and they leave you high and dry, broke, alone, and dejected.